I've always liked the quiet of the pool at night. By then, the chaos of the day had settled. The kids had gone home, the lifeguard looked half asleep, and the echo of splashes bounced softly off the tiled walls. For me, swimming wasn't about fitness anymore. It was about disappearing. Every Thursday after work, I'd show up with my worn-out gym bag, earbuds in until the moment I smelled chlorine. That sharp, chemical scent meant I could leave the world behind for an hour. The locker room was always the same. Humming lights, dripping showers, the faint buzz of a vending machine no one used. I'd fold my clothes with unnecessary care, like order could make up for whatever my life lacked outside those walls. My job was dull, my apartment quiet, my phone full of unanswered texts. The pool was the only place that didn't expect me to talk. Just move, breathe, float, and forget. The first dive was always a small shock. Cold water against warm skin, lungs tightening, then easing as I found rhythm. Stroke, kick, turn. The lanes glowed under the fluorescent ceiling, and the world shrank to the sound of my heartbeat and the hiss of bubbles breaking the surface. Time didn't exist there, just repetition and the gentle ache in my shoulders. I don't know exactly when I noticed him. Maybe it was the sound, a sharper splash than usual, or maybe just the instinct of someone else entering my quiet. I lifted my head mid-lap and saw him standing at the edge of the pool. He wasn't like the usual swimmers, the middle-aged regulars, or the occasional student cutting through the water for a workout. This guy looked effortless. Tall, lean, with a kind of casual confidence that didn't need to be shown off. His hair was light blonde, maybe a little sun-faded, and under the harsh pool lights, his skin seemed to glow faintly against the tiles. He wore bright swim trunks that almost looked out of place against the muted blues and grays of the pool. He adjusted his goggles and looked around, scanning the lanes like he was deciding where to belong. Our eyes met for a second, maybe two, long enough for me to forget the water filling my mouth. I coughed, turned back to my lane, and told myself not to make it a thing. People looked all the time. It didn't mean anything. Still, I kept noticing him. Every time I turned for another lap, there he was, gliding through the water in the lane next to mine. His form was smooth, powerful but relaxed, like every movement came from muscle memory. When he surfaced to breathe, droplets slid off his face in perfect arcs. He swam like someone who wasn't racing against anything, not even time. I tried to focus on my strokes, but my rhythm kept faltering. I caught myself timing my turns with his, trying to keep pace. It was stupid, like being pulled into a dance neither of us had agreed to join. The space between us was thin as the line of blue tiles separating the lanes. When I stopped to catch my breath at the wall, I felt rather than saw him slow down beside me. The air was heavy with chlorine and steam. For a moment, all I heard was the sound of water dripping from his hair. I looked up, pretending to stretch my neck, and found him looking right at me again. There was a small, unreadable smile on his lips. Not cocky, not shy, just present. Then he dipped under and swam away. My pulse had no business reacting the way it did. The rest of the swim was a blur. I kept going through the motions, but every time I surfaced, I found myself searching for him. Sometimes he'd be across the pool, sometimes only a few feet away. Once, when our paths crossed mid-lap, our arms brushed underwater. An accident, but it sent a current through me stronger than the water itself. When the lifeguard blew the final whistle, signaling closing time, I climbed out and sat on the edge for a moment. The pool lights shimmered across the surface like tiny stars. He was still in the water, moving lazily now, like he didn't want to leave either. He pulled himself up using the metal ladder a few lanes away. Water streamed down his back in thin lines. He grabbed his towel, shook his hair out and started drying off slow, unhurried. I tried not to stare, but every small motion drew my eyes. I told myself it was curiosity, nothing more. But when he looked up suddenly and caught me watching, I froze. He didn't seem surprised. He just smiled. Not wide, just enough to soften his features. Then turned and walked toward the showers. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. As I toweled off, I caught his reflection once in the fogged mirror by the sink. His back turned, steam curling around him like mist. For a second, the air between us felt alive, full of something unnamed and unplanned. I looked away, half embarrassed by my own thoughts. When I finally stepped outside, the night air hit me like a reset. The parking lot was empty, the world quiet again. I slung my gym bag over my shoulder and looked back once through the glass doors. Inside, he was still there, standing at the edge of the pool, goggles in hand, looking down at the water like it held an answer. Then, with one smooth motion, he dove in again. The surface broke, shimmered, and settled. Something about that moment stuck with me. The clean arc of his dive, the sound of water swallowing him whole. I didn't know his name or why he chose that hour to swim, but I knew this. The pool wouldn't feel the same again. That night, as I lay in bed with the faint scent of chlorine still on my skin, I realized the silence didn't feel as heavy. There was someone else in it now, someone whose smile had followed me home. And for reasons I couldn't yet explain, I already couldn't wait for next Thursday. The following Thursday came faster than I expected. I told myself I wasn't waiting for it, that the week had just moved quickly, but I'd cleaned my gym bag twice, bought a new pair of goggles, and even left work early so I wouldn't miss my usual slot. By the time I arrived, the pool was quiet again, that familiar echoing emptiness greeting me like an old friend. Except now it wasn't the same. He was already there. The moment I stepped out from the locker room, I spotted him cutting through the water, smooth as ever. The overhead lights flickered in waves over his body as he turned, pushed off, and glided to the far end. My stomach did something strange, something between nerves and excitement. I dropped my towel, adjusted my goggles, and slipped in. The shock of cold water snapped me out of my thoughts. But as soon as I surfaced, he was there in the next lane. We didn't say anything. We didn't have to. The first few laps felt like testing a boundary, invisible but alive. I found myself timing my turns to match his again. Every time we passed each other, I could sense him close, the faint current shifting between our lanes. Once, we both surfaced at the same moment, our eyes locking mid-breath, and we laughed quietly before ducking under again. It wasn't a conversation, but it felt like one. Something wordless and deliberate, carried by the rhythm of the water. When I paused to rest against the wall, he stopped too, just a few feet away. He pulled off his goggles, water running down his face, and smiled. "Nice form," he said, slightly out of breath. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "You clearly weren't watching the same guy." I almost swallowed half the pool. "Maybe that's part of your technique," he teased, his grin widening. I rolled my eyes, pretending to stretch to hide the fact that my heart was pounding. He didn't say anything else, just slipped his goggles back on and pushed off the wall with one clean motion. I watched him go, arms slicing through the water like he was born in it. I dove in again, trying to focus, but it was useless. Every few strokes, I'd glance sideways and catch glimpses of him, his hands breaking the surface, the trail of bubbles he left behind, the way his body turned perfectly at each wall. We swam like that for what felt like forever. In sync, apart, together, and apart again. At some point, I lost track of who was following whose rhythm. When the whistle finally blew to signal the last few minutes, I stopped and leaned against the edge, catching my breath. The pool had grown quiet, most swimmers gone. Steam rose faintly off the surface, blurring the lines between tiles and reflection. He surfaced beside me, pulling off his goggles again, his hair plastered to his forehead. "That was good," he said, resting his arms on the edge. "You're getting faster." I smirked. "Or you're getting slower." He laughed low and easy. "Maybe I just like the competition." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just full. The kind that hums between people who know there's more to say but aren't ready to say it. I looked away, pretending to study the lights shimmering in the water. Inside, though, everything felt too loud. The pulse in my throat, the rush of my thoughts. This was supposed to be simple. Swimming, breathing, routine. But now there was something else in the air. Something I didn't know how to name. He pushed himself out of the pool first, water cascading down his arms as he grabbed his towel. "You coming?" he asked, glancing back at me. Yeah, I said, though I barely moved. I climbed out a few seconds later, feeling the cool air cling to my wet skin. Around us, the world seemed to slow down, droplets echoing off the tiles, the hum of the ventilation system, the faint buzz of fluorescent light. The room was nearly empty, yet it felt crowded with unspoken things. As we both stood by the benches drying off, our reflections shimmered together in the fogged glass. I caught him looking at me once or twice, quick glances he didn't bother to hide. I wanted to say something, anything, to ask his name, to break the quiet, but every word that came to mind felt too heavy. Instead, he spoke first. You always swim this late? Yeah. Quieter this way? I said, wringing water from my hair. You? He nodded. Same. Not a fan of crowds. There was a pause. I could feel him hesitating, maybe deciding whether to keep talking. His hand brushed the edge of his towel. A small, nervous gesture that made him seem more real, less untouchable. I almost didn't come tonight, he said finally. Long day. But I figured, routines help, right? I smiled, though something in his tone made my chest tighten. Yeah, they keep things together. He nodded slowly, eyes lingering on me just a second longer than necessary before he looked away. Guess I'll see you next Thursday, then? Came out half a question, half a promise. I froze for a moment, caught off guard by the warmth in his voice. Yeah, I said quietly. Next Thursday. He smiled again, small, genuine, then slung his bag over his shoulder and walked toward the locker room. The steam curled around him, softening his outline until he vanished through the doorway. I stood there a little longer, the air heavy with chlorine and something else I couldn't name. The water was still now, reflecting the lights in perfect ripples. I traced one with my eyes until it faded, realizing I was smiling without meaning to. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't thinking about work or deadlines or the silence of my apartment. I was thinking about next Thursday, and the way a stranger's voice could make even an ordinary pool feel like the beginning of something new. I picked up my towel, slung it over my shoulder, and headed out. The night air met me like cool relief, carrying the faint smell of rain. Behind the glass, the pool lights flickered once, then dimmed, and I caught myself whispering it under my breath, almost like a secret I wasn't supposed to say out loud. Next Thursday. Over the next few weeks, our Thursday nights became something quietly sacred. Neither of us ever said we were meeting, but somehow we always ended up in the pool at the same time. The routine slipped into rhythm, my strokes aligning with his, our rest breaks syncing perfectly, our glances becoming a kind of unspoken ritual. It started with small talk, a nod here, a hey there, but soon we began staying after our swims, sitting on the wooden benches that lined the far wall once the lifeguard turned down the lights for closing. The sound of dripping water echoed through the empty hall, and our voices filled the space softly, never rushed. The first night we talked for real, he mentioned music, a random comment about the playlist playing faintly over the speakers. Who even chooses this stuff? He joked, wringing out his towel. Feels like I'm swimming in an elevator. I laughed, shaking my head. You'd be surprised how fast you can swim to jazz. He grinned. That sounds like a challenge. It was easy after that. We talked about the kind of music that made long nights feel shorter, about bands we'd both outgrown, about how every good song feels like it belongs to someone else until it doesn't. From there, the topics drifted: classes he'd taken at university, the city's unpredictable weather, favorite coffee shops. Nothing deep, not yet, but everything honest. Felt strange to open up so easily. I wasn't used to being seen, not outside the surface of a pool. But there was something about him. The way he listened, eyes steady, lips curling into quiet amusement whenever I tried to be clever. He didn't interrupt. He didn't fill silences with noise. He just was, and that was enough to make me stay a little longer each night. One Thursday, I learned his name. He said it casually, almost like he didn't realize it mattered. The manager keeps mixing up my membership under my first name, he said with a roll of his eyes. I repeated it under my breath, testing the sound. Fit him. I told him mine, and he said it back like he was memorizing it. The way he said it, slow, deliberate, sent a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the humid air. He told me he came to swim late because it helped him sleep. Insomnia, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. And anxiety. Water quiets it down. For a while, anyway. That word, anxiety, hung between us for a second, raw and real. I nodded, understanding more than I could say. Same, I said softly. Different reasons, maybe, but same. He looked at me then, really looked, and something in his expression softened, like he saw a reflection of himself there. After that, our talks grew longer. Some nights, we'd sit until the staff turned off the overhead lights, talking in the glow of the emergency exit sign. Sometimes our knees brushed accidentally, and neither of us moved away. Other times, we shared a towel to dry the bench after the janitor mopped. It wasn't deliberate, but it felt deliberate. The closeness, the pauses, the electricity that lingered quietly beneath it all. Then came the night of the storm. The sky had already turned violet when I walked in. By the time we hit the water, thunder rolled across the horizon like a low drum. The pool lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The few swimmers who were there left early, muttering about the weather. We stayed. The sound of rain against the high windows mixed with the rhythm of our strokes. The world outside blurred into sheets of water and muted flashes of lightning. Inside, it felt like we were swimming in a storm of our own. Two bodies moving in sync, suspended between silence and sound. When the final whistle blew, neither of us moved. The lifeguard gave up first, shaking his head. "You two can lock up," he joked before disappearing into the office. We climbed out of the pool, laughing breathlessly, dripping everywhere. Then the lights flickered again, once, twice, then out. For a few seconds, the world went dark except for the faint blue glow from the emergency lights. I heard him laugh quietly beside me. "Guess we're on night shift now." "Great," I said. "I've always wanted to drown in style." "Not with me here," he replied, his voice softer now. Closer. In the dim light, his face looked different, gentler, framed by droplets that shimmered faintly against his skin. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something more, but instead he looked away, rubbing his towel over his hair. When the lights finally came back on, we were both smiling like idiots. The rain was relentless by the time we left the building. The air outside was cool, the kind that carried the smell of wet asphalt and freedom. We stood under the awning for a while, watching the downpour hit the parking lot. He shivered slightly, water still running down his arms. Without thinking, I offered him my towel. "You'll catch a cold," I said. He took it with a grin. "You sound like someone's dad." "Maybe I am," I said playfully. "You'll never know." He laughed, the sound easy and bright even under the storm's noise. For a second, his hand brushed mine when he handed the towel back. Neither of us moved. The touch was brief, but enough to make the air shift, sharp, electric, alive. We both stepped back at the same time, eyes flicking away. "I should go," he said quietly. "Yeah," I replied. "Me too." But neither of us moved right away. The rain fell harder, thunder rolling over the city. He finally turned, heading toward his car, but paused halfway through the lot. "Hey!" he called, raising his voice over the rain. "Next week." I smiled, trying not to sound too eager. "Next week." He nodded once, then ran for his car, splashing through puddles. I watched him go, the glow from his taillights blurring red through the curtain of rain. I stood there until the pool lights behind me shut off completely. The storm roared on, soaking me through, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I didn't want the week to end. By the time a month had passed, Thursday nights had become the axis around which my whole week turned. Work felt lighter on Thursdays. The noise of the city didn't press so hard. Every routine, folding my towel, checking my watch, locking my door, carried a quiet anticipation. That evening, the receptionist warned me as I walked in. "Pool's closing early tonight. Maintenance issue." I nodded, but inside, disappointment flickered. Still, I went in. I wasn't there for the laps anymore, not really. He arrived a few minutes later, breathless as though he'd run to make it. Our eyes met instantly, and that same small current of warmth passed through me. The one that never seemed to fade. "Early close, huh?" he said, tossing his bag on the bench beside mine. "Yeah," I replied. "Guess we'll have to swim fast." He smirked. "Or just stay anyway." There was a teasing glint in his eyes, but behind it, something quieter, something honest. We swam for a while, the pool nearly empty. The air was heavy with the faint hum of the filter system and the gentle slap of water against tile. At one point, we both stopped mid-lane, resting on the divider line, breathing hard. He smiled at me. That same open, unguarded smile that had haunted my thoughts for weeks. "I've been waiting for this," he said. I blinked, catching my breath. "What? A chance to beat me again?" He shook his head. "No. Here. You." The words hung in the air, carried softly across the rippling surface. I didn't know what to say, so I just floated there, staring at him, the world narrowing to the sound of water between us. When the lights dimmed to signal closing, we didn't move. Instead, we climbed out and sat side by side at the pool's edge, our legs dangling into the still water. The room was quiet now, just the low hum of machinery and the faint echo of the clock ticking on the far wall. He leaned back on his palms, looking up at the ceiling. "You ever think about how weird it is?" he said. "What is?" "That we keep finding peace in a place built for noise. People yelling, splashing, competing. But at this hour, it's like it forgets all that. Becomes something else." I smiled faintly. "Yeah. Feels like we're the only two people left sometimes." He nodded, his expression soft. "Maybe that's why I keep coming back." There was no need to ask what he meant. The truth had been sitting between us for weeks. Quiet, patient, waiting. We talked for a long time after that. About the kind of loneliness that doesn't look lonely from the outside. About pretending to be fine. About how swimming was the only thing that made him feel weightless again. "I used to come here after bad days," he said quietly, tracing his finger along the edge of the pool. "At first, it was just about moving until I couldn't think anymore. Then you started showing up." I looked at him, caught between disbelief and hope. "And now?" He turned toward me, his eyes reflecting the pale light from the water. "Now I just wait for Thursdays." My chest tightened. The sound of dripping water filled the pause that followed. I didn't trust my voice, so I said nothing. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air felt thick, suspended. Then, without planning it, my hand brushed against his, a light, uncertain touch. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers turned, linking loosely with mine. The warmth that spread through me felt almost physical, like sunlight through water. "I like you," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. The simplicity of it hit harder than anything else could have. No build-up, no drama. Just 3 quiet words that made the entire room seem to breathe differently. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I like you too." We didn't look away. The space between us seemed to dissolve. Not rushed, not desperate, just quietly inevitable. I could feel his pulse against my wrist, quick but steady. His thumb brushed my knuckles, nervous and tender at once. The water below us shimmered, reflecting soft patterns of light onto the ceiling. It almost looked alive, like it was listening, holding its breath with us. He smiled, eyes flicking down, then back up. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever say it." "Neither was I admitted, laughing quietly. "Guess I was waiting for you to make the first move." "Well," he said, his voice lowering, "I just did." For a second, everything stood still. The clock, the air, even the faint ripple of the pool. Then, slowly, carefully, he leaned closer. It wasn't a movie kind of kiss. It was hesitant, unsure, soft. The kind that happens when 2 people realize they've been walking toward it for weeks without knowing. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of chlorine and courage. My hand instinctively found his jaw, feeling the slight tremor in it. When we finally pulled back, both of us were smiling, half shy, half relieved. He exhaled a laugh that broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. Guess we just broke the Thursday routine, he said. I laughed too, my heartbeat still wild. Maybe we just made a new one. We sat there a while longer, our shoulders touching, our feet making tiny ripples in the water. The pool lights glowed dimly around us, reflections dancing on our faces. It felt like the world had paused just to let this happen. The hum of the filters, the faint echo of rain outside, even the clock ticking slower than usual. Neither of us said much after that. Words didn't feel necessary. There was something more real in the silence, the comfort of being seen without having to explain anything. When the final lights flickered off and the staff called out that they were locking up, we stood reluctantly. Our fingers brushed one last time before we walked toward the lockers. At the door, he turned to me, eyes still bright. Next week. I nodded. Next week. He smiled, then stepped out into the hall, his footsteps fading into the quiet. I stayed a moment longer, looking back at the pool. The surface was still glowing faintly under the safety lights, ripples moving like memories. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, wonderfully seen. The week after our kiss stretched longer than any I could remember. The days felt heavier, quieter, like the air before a storm that never comes. I went to work, made coffee, answered emails, went through the motions. But underneath it all was a nervous hum I couldn't silence. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was him. Every time it wasn't, I told myself I didn't care. We hadn't made plans, not really. Next week, he'd said. Simple enough. But those words suddenly carried weight. What if he regretted it? What if I'd imagined everything? The warmth in his eyes, the way he said my name like it meant something. By Thursday afternoon, I was so tied in knots I almost convinced myself to skip the pool entirely. I told myself I needed a break, that I was tired, that maybe the water could wait. But the truth was uglier. I was scared. Scared of what I might find if I went. Scared of what it would mean if I didn't. So I stayed home that night, sat by the window with the lights off, watching the street lamps blur against the glass. The world looked distant, muffled. Somewhere, I knew he was probably at the pool, swimming laps in the quiet, waiting, maybe wondering if I'd show. The thought hollowed me out. The next few days were worse. Guilt sat heavy in my chest, mixed with the familiar ache of missed chances. I'd done this before, pulled away the moment something real appeared. It was easier to lose people on my own terms than risk watching them walk away first. I thought back to the relationships I'd half lived through. People who cared more than I could handle, or people I chased only to find emptiness waiting. Each time I told myself I was better alone, safer that way. But now, alone didn't feel safe. It felt like drowning slowly in still water. By the time the next Thursday came, I couldn't sit still. I told myself it was just another swim, nothing more. But as I packed my towel, my hands shook. The pool was nearly empty when I arrived. The receptionist nodded without much interest. Quiet night, she said. I walked through the locker room, heart pounding hard enough to echo. I half hoped he wouldn't be there just to end the suspense, and half hoped he would because I didn't know how to exist in this silence anymore. When I stepped onto the pool deck, I froze. He was there, sitting at the far edge of the water, legs in the pool, staring at the tiled floor like it held answers. He looked up as soon as he heard my footsteps. Relief flickered across his face. Quick, real, gone just as fast. You came, he said, voice low but steady. Yeah, I managed. Didn't want to break the routine. He smiled faintly, though his eyes gave him away. Tired, uncertain. I thought maybe you were done with it. I almost was, I admitted, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. About that night. He nodded slowly. The water lapped quietly around his feet. Me too. I sat down beside him, leaving a careful inch of space between us. The silence stretched, not tense, just fragile. The kind where one wrong word could make everything fall apart. I thought maybe I scared you off, he said finally. You didn't, I said. I scared myself off. He looked at me, brows knitting. I'm not good at this, I continued, at letting things in. Every time something starts to matter, I convince myself it's safer to walk away before it hurts. He nodded, eyes on the water. I get that. You do. Yeah, he said softly. I've done it too. You weren't the only one who panicked. I spent all week thinking I'd ruined it, that maybe it meant more to me than it did to you. I turned to him. It did mean something. That's what scared me. He exhaled a shaky laugh. Funny. We were both afraid of the same thing, that it was real. The honesty of it hung between us, raw and quiet. There was no dramatic music, no sudden rush of emotion. Just two people sitting by a pool, admitting they'd both been afraid to be seen. For a long moment, we didn't speak. The hum of the filters filled the silence like a heartbeat. Then, slowly, he reached out. Not to hold, not to pull, just to let his hand rest next to mine on the cool tile. Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. I don't know where this goes, he said, but I don't want to run from it. Neither do I whispered. The tension in my chest eased. Not completely, but enough to breathe again. I turned my hand slightly, letting our fingers brush. He smiled, small and tired but real. We stayed like that, side by side, watching the faint ripples shimmer under the lights. The air smelled faintly of chlorine and something cleaner, like renewal. At one point, I said quietly, I spent so long thinking connection was about hiding, about keeping the best parts of yourself tucked away until someone proved they wouldn't hurt you. He looked at me, eyes soft. And now I think maybe real connection is when you stop hiding, even when it terrifies you. He didn't answer. He just nodded like he understood, and that was enough. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. What we shared instead was quieter, steadier, the kind of closeness that doesn't ask for proof. When he leaned his shoulder against mine, it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The janitor flicked the lights twice, signaling closing. We didn't move right away. Eventually, he stood and offered me his hand. Same time next week? I took it, holding his gaze. Next week, I said. He smiled, a small, relieved thing, and squeezed my hand before letting go. As he walked toward the lockers, I looked back at the pool. The water glowed faintly under the lights, ripples smoothing into calm. For the first time, I understood something I'd never felt before. That real intimacy isn't found in stolen moments or whispered secrets. It's found in being seen, completely, and not turning away. And somehow that felt braver than any confession could ever be. By the time winter began to fade, our Thursdays had turned into something more like mornings. It started small, one of us showing up earlier, the other following without question. Before long, we were the first ones at the pool instead of the last to leave. Those early hours felt different. The city outside was still half asleep, streetlights humming faintly as the first light slipped through clouds. The water looked softer then, silver instead of blue, as if it hadn't yet decided to wake. He'd always arrive first, sitting on the edge with his coffee cup beside him, steam curling like breath in the cold air. I'd sneak up, pretending to startle him, and he'd laugh every time, a sound that never failed to make the morning feel alive. Our swims were slower now, less about laps, more about rhythm. We'd drift across lanes side by side, talk between strokes, sometimes race just to make each other laugh. Afterward, we'd sit in the bleachers with towels over our shoulders, trading songs through one pair of earbuds, letting the music fill whatever words we didn't say. He made a playlist one week, called it Thursdays but Quieter. It was full of songs that felt like him. Soft guitar, warm piano, a few that didn't even have lyrics, just a steady hum. I listened to it on my way to work, on nights I couldn't sleep, on the mornings I missed him more than I wanted to admit. Somewhere in those months, the pool stopped being a place to escape. It became a place to remember. Every tile, every echo, every shimmer of light carried something of us. Laughter bouncing off the walls, the warmth of a shoulder brushing mine, the silence that somehow said everything. One morning in late spring, the sky was the color of pale gold when I arrived. He was already there, sitting at the edge of the water with his hands folded loosely in his lap. He looked up as I approached, but this time his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey!" I said softly, setting my bag down beside him. You're early. Couldn't sleep, he said, his voice calm but distant. Something in his tone made my stomach twist. Everything okay? He hesitated, staring at the ripples on the surface. I got a job offer, he said finally. Out of state. It's a good one. I'd be stupid to say no. The words landed like a quiet splash. No loud sound, just ripples spreading outward. Oh, I said, because it was all I could manage. When? End of the month. I nodded, staring down at the water. The reflection of the ceiling lights wavered slightly, like the pool itself had exhaled. That's soon, I murmured. Yeah, he said, his voice soft. I didn't want to tell you like this. I kept trying to find the right time, but there never was one. We sat there for a while, the hum of the filter filling the silence. I could feel the sting behind my ribs, that strange ache that comes when something good meets its end. So that's it, I asked quietly. You're leaving. He looked at me then, eyes full of something raw and honest. I don't want to, he said, but I need to. There's a chance to start over, to do something I've worked for. I know, I said, forcing a small smile. You should take it. He studied me for a moment, then shook his head with a faint laugh. You're too good at pretending you're okay. I looked down, toes brushing the water. You're the one who taught me that silence can hide more than words. He chuckled softly, but the sound faded fast. Do you ever think we were supposed to meet here? He asked. Like maybe all those lonely nights were just leading up to this? Sometimes, I said. Sometimes I think the water knew before we did. The air felt heavier then, full of things we didn't know how to say. He stood, offered me his hand, and nodded toward the pool. One last swim. I took his hand without thinking. Always. We slipped into the water together, the sound breaking the quiet like a whisper. It was colder than usual, maybe because of the hour or maybe because we both knew what it meant. We swam side by side, slow and easy, no race, no words. The light from the high windows began to shift, gold now, touching the surface like fire scattered across glass. Every movement, every ripple felt sacred, as if the water was memorizing us before we left. When we reached the far wall, we both stopped, holding on to the edge, breathing in the same rhythm. I turned to look at him. His hair was plastered to his forehead, droplets glinting in the morning light. He smiled, tired but real. I'm going to miss this, he said. Yeah, I whispered. Me too. We stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the dawn unfold across the surface. The world outside was waking. Faint car horns, the low rumble of buses, the kind of sounds that meant life was moving on whether we wanted it to or not. He looked at me then, really looked, and I knew he was memorizing too. The same way I was. The scent of chlorine, the hum of the lights, the reflection of sunrise in my eyes. I don't know when I'll be back, he said quietly. I know, I said, but I'll keep swimming, he added, smiling faintly. Somewhere out there under the same sky. I felt my throat tighten. Then I'll do the same. He nodded, and for a moment it felt like a promise, not of forever but of memory. Something that would live in the quiet spaces between now and whatever came next. We climbed out together, water trailing behind us like threads of glass. He reached for his towel, but his hand paused midair. When he looked at me, the sunlight caught his face just right. All warmth, all ache. Then, without a word, he leaned in. The kiss was softer this time. Not a beginning, not an ending, just a pause in between. His lips tasted of salt and morning air. I could feel the tremor in his breath, the steady beat of his heart against mine. When he pulled back, he laughed quietly. You always make goodbyes harder than they need to be. Sorry, I said, smiling despite the ache. It's my worst habit. He grinned. Then don't break it. He gathered his things and started toward the exit. I watched him go, his reflection trailing beside him in the still water. At the door, he turned one last time. Keep swimming, he said. Always, I replied. And then he was gone. The pool was silent again. Only the faint ripples remained, stretching lazily across the surface where we'd been. I sat on the edge for a while, letting the morning light spill over everything. The tiles, the benches, the water that had carried us through so much. When I finally stood, I looked back one more time. The pool glowed softly, golden now, alive with memory. I came here to escape the world, but the water didn't save me, he did. And even as I walked away, I knew the pool would remember us. Every laugh, every silence, every ripple that once carried our names. Because some places, once touched by love, never go still again. If the story made you feel something, that quiet warmth of connection or the ache of goodbye, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional stories like this one. Your support helps bring these moments to life every week. Do you believe people we meet by chance, like the ones who change our routines forever, are meant to cross our paths? Or is it all just timing? And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel.